Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new pair of Ace in a Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the highly requested M.C.202 Folgore, also known as the Thunderbolt and more properly known as the Aeronautica Macchi C202. This is an Italian fighter aircraft coming at a tier of 1 and a battle rating of 2.0. To provide you with a brief historical overview as to this aircraft, we begin thus. The near obsolescence of the Aeronautica Macchi C200 by the end of the 1930s, especially with regards to its underpowered Fiat A74 radial engine, led to its designer, Mario Castaldi, hence the C in the fighter's designation representing Castaldi's work. The designer began work on redesigning the plane in 1938. This work came to fruition in 1940 with the German Daimler-Benz DB601 AA inline engine being available for import from Germany. The prototype C202 airframe, known as MM445, flew for the first time with this engine as of August the 10th of that year, and in subsequent test flights was to demonstrate that the plane had caught up with the British and German opponents of that era. It was able to reach a top speed of 603 km an hour or 375 miles per hour, was able to climb in 6 minutes to 5,486 metres altitude or 18,000 feet, and had retained the good overall manoeuvrability of the C200, as its airframe design was a merger of the C200's wings, undercarriage and tail unit with a new main fuselage to accommodate the new engine. The cockpit was also now fully enclosed compared to the open cockpit of the C200, and thanks to the plane's metallic airframe, pilots could put this plane into a steep dive without hesitation, with one pilot being quoted as having reached over 1,000 km an hour in a dive and successfully pulling out. By the end of 1940 then, with the Alfa Romeo team having obtained the licence to produce their version of the Daimler-Benz 601 AA engine as the RA1000 RC411 Monsone 1,175 horsepower inline engine, the Regia Aeronautica, or the Italian Royal Air Force, had ordered the C202 into production alongside its predecessor, the C200, as the main difference between these planes on the production line was in terms of the engine that they used, otherwise they were rather similar. The first C202s then rolled off the production line into combat service by May of 1941, and the plane was to see service at Malta, North Africa, the Eastern Front, and in the defence of both Sicily and southern Italy, all the way up to Italy's surrender on the 3rd of September 1943. In this, the C202 was to build a reputation as an even match for its contemporaries in terms of its performance, but not in terms of its firepower, being able to match up to the Supermarine Spitfire Mark V and the Messerschmitt 19F. To put the item about the firepower in context, Australian ace Clive Caldwell believed the fighter would have been superior to the Messerschmitt 109 if only its armament had been better, with the armament of the plane being seen as lacking the punch in order to bring down enemy fighters, let alone bombers such as the B-17. The aircraft was initially armed with the same armament as the C200, two 12.7mm Breda-SAFAT machine guns mounted in the upper engine cowling with 400 rounds per gun. This armament was to be added to from the 7th series production run onwards in 1942, with two 7.7mm Breda-SAFAT machine guns mounted in the wings, with one to each wing and possessing 500 rounds per gun. But the lack of overall effectiveness of these additional machine guns meant that a number of pilots wanted to remove them, as they added an extra 100 kg of mass to the aircraft, meaning that these pilots would prefer to use just the two 12.7mm machine guns instead. The reason for the low damage output of the two 12.7mm machine guns was due to the fact that they fired the 12.7 by 81mm Vickers cartridge, rather than the 12.7 by 99mm cartridge as featured on the United States' M2 Browning. This meant that the 12.7mm machine gun round left the barrel at roughly 62% of the energy of that of the same round leaving the Browning, lowering its overall damage potential significantly when striking an enemy aircraft. And as we turn the page, a grand total of 1,106 C202s were produced by the time of Italy's surrender in 1943. This low number was due to two factors: the complexity of the design and how that translated onto the production line, and the low availability of the Alfa Romeo inline engine as it was copied from the Daimler-Benz engine. Still, the plane remained in service as a trainer for the Italian Air Force all the way up to 1948, retiring from service in 1951 in the hands of the Egyptian Air Force. And with our historical overview out of the way, let us take a look at how the MC202 handles in War Thunder. For our first game of today, we're on the airfield domination map Kamiensk. For this and all subsequent games, we shall be using the following setup. Stealth belts for all of our machine gun based armament, whereby the reasoning for this is as follows. As we noted in our historical overview, the overall power of our firepower in terms of being able to cut apart enemy fuselages is going to be quite low, and this is reflected in War Thunder noticeably. So we intend to offset this by increasing our ability to achieve insta-kills, i.e. knocking out enemy pilots, or alternatively penetrating and igniting enemy fuel tanks, causing our opponents to burn to death. The stealth belts will allow us to maximise this, whereby for the 7.7s we have 3 armour piercing rounds which have the ability to penetrate cockpit glass and kill pilots, and 2 armour piercing incendiary rounds which can penetrate and ignite enemy fuel tanks. This is carried through on the 12.7mm machine guns, whereby we have 2 armour piercing incendiary rounds once again, and 2 immediate action incendiary rounds as well, with these rounds having the ability, when they strike an enemy aircraft, to ignite any flammable substances located nearby to the point of incident. As for our gun convergence, as we try to creep up underneath a MiG-334, climbing in the cloud layer above us, we are using a 400m gun convergence, whereby this is because we want to inhabit a variety of roles over the course of a given game. We do not intend to class ourselves, or indeed the C202, as a fighter hunter or a bomber hunter, but be able to switch between both roles and indeed the styles of play, whether it be turn and burn or boom and zoom, over the course of a given match, and a 400m gun convergence will allow for this. We should also consider that the limited muzzle velocity of our wing-mounted 7.7mm machine guns means that when we try to shoot at distances in excess of 600 metres, we are really reliant on just our 12.7mm machine guns, as the effective range of the 7.7s maxes out at approximately 550 metres, and a gun convergence of 400 metres will accommodate this regard. And finally, as per the norm, we are carrying 30 minutes of fuel to make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. Now we begin our analysis by going into an extended boom and zoom pass, having just hammer-headed out of a stall, whereby our stall speed is at approximately 135 km an hour, and the rudder of this aircraft works very nicely even at the lowest of speeds, meaning you can quickly get the plane around on its rudder when needs be. As we dive down towards our foes then, we're going to strike directly from above a PE3 to start off with, and with only 1 to 2 seconds on target here we can see how limited the potency of our firepower is, doing very little damage against a more heavily armoured opponent, or a more durable opponent. But we will not be dissuaded and we carry through, going after a Hurricane Mark IV. But here we get quite a tight shot and we're going quite quick, having got to roughly 690 km an hour by the time we opened fire. And it would seem as though we were held back by the controllability of our aircraft there in getting a clean shot. But now having bled our speed a little bit more, we get a much cleaner shot off on a P400, who was flying at a much more accommodating angle. And we can carry our momentum through to pick up a double kill on this P26A pea shooter. But let us talk about the controllability of this aircraft at high speed, as it did hold us back against that Hurricane Mark IV in particular. This plane's control surfaces begin to lock up in excess of 500 km an hour, and the lockup is quite sharp, whereby by the time you hit 650 km an hour, your roll rate or your ailerons will be locked up to roughly 25% of their standard performance capability, and that is the maximum lockup. Meanwhile, this maximisation occurs at 700 km an hour for both your rudder and elevator, locking up to roughly 25%. This means at extreme speeds this plane is not going to be accommodating for boom and zoom passes whereby you are trying to hit foes who know you are coming. And I would assume, apart from the PE3 potentially, that all 3 of the foes otherwise in that boom and zoom pass did not know we were coming until we opened fire. So that's why we want to try and exploit those extended boom and zoom passes, so we can pick on foes who do not know we are coming, and that means we do not have to do as much adjustment in our flight path to hit them and try to knock them out. And as we come around here we notice an enemy Yakovlev Yak-7 harassing our friendly Wellington. It is our intention to try and clear the Wellington's tail if the Yak-7 continues on their chosen path, as they seem to be overspeeding and overshooting the Wellington. They are now beginning to come around and we go into a dive, picking up our speed gradually in a dive and not at the rate that would be expected in the likes of aircraft such as a MiG-3. In fact, we fall significantly short. We latch onto the tail of the Yak-7B then and open fire. We're quite accurate in our shooting, but we note how the limited potency of our firepower means that it is only after we get a sustained burst on target that the Yak-7B falls, and they were able to take out our Wellington as a result. And we will now emphasise this as we force the Ki-45 code to stall out underneath us. We're being risky here, cutting over the top of them, and then we're going to level ourselves out and use the power of our rudder in a flat turn in order to make sure the Ki-45 can never get a clean shot off. We now begin to get our nose up to create the hammerhead, and the Ki-45 has stalled out, and we swing around, just a little bit short of our convergence here at 300 metres as we open fire and take an extended burst on target, cutting apart the KI-45 for our 4th kill. But notice how we had to create time there. We had to have that 3 to 5 second burst on the target, more towards 5 seconds against the KI-45 to knock them out. We did set them on fire, but we got the kill by knocking off their left-hand wing. Now this is important, and we will show this again now against the A36 Apache, who at the last minute will break into a head-to-head and we will break out of it to avoid colliding, or being ripped apart by their 12.7s. We come around with our turn circle that is just as tight, if not slightly tighter than a Messerschmitt Y9 Emil, more towards the likes of a Yakovlev Yak-1, which is a good turn circle to have. As we break onto the 60 of the A36, we continue to open fire, and having now got them in our sights for our 12.7mm machine guns based in the nose, we can cut them apart for what is going to be our ace in a day. But importantly, notice how much time we had to shoot our foe at that point. We had well over 5 seconds of engagement time, in contrast to the 1 to 2 seconds we had at the start of the game against the P3 and the Hurricane Mark IV. So if we want to cut our opponents apart using our machine guns, we can do so, it is not impossible, but we have to make our shots last for a longer period of time. Sustained fire will win the day in that regard. And now as we start to dive towards the furball in the middle of the map, unfortunately we are going to see it is too late and our team's tickets will expire. But in general we can see how we're building up our speed quite nicely again, at a manageable rate, but not too rapidly. I mean, the dive speed potential of this aircraft is limited in some regard. But nonetheless, as we try to latch onto the lag free, switching over to the F4F, the game ends and it is time for us to take a look at our post-game stats. With our ace in a day, we're able to pick up 10,327 Silver Lions and 1,469 research points. Hopefully in this first game then, we have demonstrated in a short period of time how the C202 embodies a versatility not typically found at its battle rating and tier, whereby we started off as an interceptor, bringing down the MiG-334 to lower altitude as we pressed them not to be able to achieve altitude supremacy. We then moved into more of a standard boom and zoom style of play, making an extended pass through the middle of the battlefield, hitting multiple foes as we went. We then returned to the interceptor role when trying to bring down the Yak-7B from the tail of our friendly Wellington, before making our final transition into more of a turn and burn style fighter, whereby we took on the KI-45 in the midst of a stall and forced them to stall out in our wake, and then went head to head with the A36 Apache, forcing them into a direct 1-to-1 turn fight and bringing them down accordingly. But in all the engagements that we had during this first game, we must also emphasise the fact that we tried to make our time on target last as long as possible, whereby we preferred having 5 or more seconds to shoot at our foes rather than 1 to 2 seconds, due to the limited overall damage per second of our armament, whereby the more rounds we can put in, the greater the attritional effect and the more likely our foe will come apart under our fire. Otherwise we have to rely on insta-kills such as picking up the pilot kill or setting our foes on fire, as demonstrated on the KI-45 and the Yak-7B. But by embodying these two principles, we're able to come first by comparison to the rest of our team. And the issue with the principle of trying to force our opponents to stay in our gun sight for as long as possible is that sometimes you cannot achieve this, as you may not get those one-on-one engagements, and sometimes you may end up with a situation where a good portion of the enemy team sticks together as a clump. And this can make flying the C202 feel like an isolated and rather frustrating experience, as our second game now is going to show. For our final game of today then, we're on the ground strike map Alpine Meadows. Using the same setup as before, we are going to start off once again by embodying the versatility of the C202 by using it in a bomber interceptor role. This means we're going to have to demonstrate the superior climb rate of this aircraft compared to a majority of its battle rating contemporaries, whereby starting off at an altitude of 2,500 metres, we very quickly assailed to 3,800 metres altitude before having to turn out due to the encroaching presence of fighters from the enemy spawn. But as we do, let us contextualise our climb rate, as it is second best compared to the likes of the KI-44 Mark IIC, which we reviewed in particular last weekend, and you may see that review using the link in the top right corner of your screen as annotated now. But still, let us commend the climb rate of the C202 and the fact that it means we can get to altitude very quickly compared to most. And now turning out at 3,800 metres, as stated earlier, we decide to go into level flight and go for a side climb in the near future, using our good overall acceleration from stall speed to 350 km an hour just on our engine power alone to make sure that we have enough kinetic energy to go back into a climb in the near future. You can extend this threshold to 450 km an hour on your more emergency power, But above these two thresholds you will find that your acceleration drops away quite rapidly, and this means that the plane does not have the great overall acceleration that some interceptors have, such as the Ki-44 and the MiG-3 at higher speeds. At the same time, the acceleration falls behind the likes of a Yak-1 up to that 350 km/h limit in the case of just engine power. Two things to consider. And now, breaking our way around at 4,750 metres altitude, we are going to go for the P-40 Kitty Hawk. They are isolated and have not clocked onto our presence by the looks of things, so we're going to try and make them pay for this. They also have a Junkers 87D right above them, and we hope to attack them as well. We were hoping to knock this P-40 Kitty Hawk out in our initial bursts because we had so much time on target, and then go for the Junkers 87. But we are going to continue making it look as though we were to go for the Junkers 87, and we will loop on the P-40 instead. We knock them out by achieving a pilot kill as demonstrated now, and then the Junkers 87 dives past us. So why do we draw emphasis to that loop towards the Junkers 87? Well, this is more gamecraft than the C202 in particular, but sometimes you can intimidate your foes to do what you want them to do without necessarily having to even engage them or fire a shot. We wanted that Junkers 87 at a minimum to dive down towards the ground targets, as the higher they are, the more likely we will have to go for them, as we need to intercept the bomber threat at level altitude. But by forcing them to dive down, they have compromised all of their altitude abilities, and that means now they are constrained to attacking the ground targets and being very vulnerable to our allies. And this means we can focus on the greater threat, which is the Wellington with its 4,000 pound cookie. They are continuing to fly level, and we decide to push towards 5,000 metres altitude, if not more, heading towards our stall now, as we exceed 5,100 metres altitude. And we will demonstrate here as we head to stall and drop our speed below 250 km/h, our elevator becomes quite sticky and heavy, meaning that when we are at these lower speeds in the midst of a low speed turn fight in particular, we cannot rely on our elevator as much as we can the consistency of our ailerons and our rudder. And this is something to be wary of and a weakness in the MC202, the fact that its elevator is heavy at low speed. But in bringing our nose back up now gradually, having gone into an extended dive in order to build up our speed, as we thought the Wellington may be diving down to lower altitude but instead decided to do a yo-yo bomb dive, or at least we would assume that, we're coming onto the beam of the Wellington here, who is aware of our presence as they start to try and turn their tail towards us as we open fire. We get a significant burst off here for at least 4 to 5 seconds, if not more. We achieve a critical hit on the Wellington's tail, potentially knocking out a portion of their controllability in that regard. But we're not done yet. We decide to cut over the top and strike them from above as they turn underneath us. Here setting their left hand fuel tank on fire, eye that in the wing, and now we break off. Because having achieved that fire in a significant fuel tank of the aircraft, we are assuming it's going to burn to death shortly. Emphasising our setup as discussed earlier. And with the Wellington knocked out for our second kill, we have now obtained altitude supremacy and intercepted all the available enemy bombers at altitude. So now we can transition back into a boom and zoom playstyle. Now at this point some of you may be wondering, well, why boom and zoom? Why not try and turn fight with some of your foes? Well, look at where our foes are situated in the majority. They're all situated in a cluster on the southern side of the map in a massive furball that has got some friendlies, but the majority of the planes there are opposition aircraft. Now this is a problem for the C202. We have the performance to go into the midst of a furball and turn fight with a good number of foes and potentially get shots off, but it's whether those shots will kill the foes in a short period of time, as furball engagements are typically very quick, high-paced moments where you only get 1 to 2 seconds to shoot at a foe that crosses your gun sight before you have someone on your 6. And we cannot afford that with a C202 because of our firepower, whereby so far we have demonstrated the only way we'll cut down our foes is either by getting that insta-kill, or alternatively having a 5-second burst on our foe and cut them apart accordingly. Although fortunately here the Junkers 87G1, as you will see, just falls apart under our fire, allowing us to pick up our third kill. So instead we have to go for the boom and zoom playstyle here, even though we are pushing our plane above speeds that it is suited for, in order to stay alive in the midst of the frenzy, whereby we put a lot of rounds into the lag 366 but not enough, and decide to break away before they can get an accurate shot onto us, using our overspeed here to our advantage. Although note that the energy retention of this plane is quite strong when coming out of a dive, as long as you do not make too many exacerbated manoeuvres, and that has allowed us to get away from the lag 366. We carry through here towards the P-36A Hawk in our direct line of fire. As they turn out in front of us, we try to get a shot on. I only scratched them, unfortunately. We could not get too accurate in a shot, as we are flying at too high a speed to be able to get that level flight stability for our ailerons. So we decide to break up into a climb here, making sure that we give ourselves time and distance to re-engage the situation. We notice that the P-36 Hawk is continuing to harass our ground targets unabated, although they do have a Heinkel 112 trying to get a pass on them, and the Heinkel 112 crashes into the ground. And we also notice a PBY following behind the P-36, so we can quite comfortably attack the Hawk without any fear of retaliation from any other enemies in the near vicinity. So we decide to make our way down on top of the P-36 here. We'll come back to the PBY shortly. We are hoping to kill off the Hawk with another burst. But the Hawk, being a rather durable plane, is going to soak up our machine gun fire here. We achieve some damage to their tail, although it does not appear to be enough. We decide to cut up and stay right behind them for another burst. It seems as though they've got at least a fuel tank leak, and they've also taken some tail damage, and here we get a little bit too close for comfort and start to miss our shots. As the Hawk begins to throw themselves into a gun defense series of manoeuvres, we do some more tail damage to them and we decide to break off. We've done enough in our personal opinion to make that Hawk combat obsolete. And now we head towards the PBY-5, going head to head, aiming towards the cockpit and picking up a pilot kill. Picking up one of those insta-kills we talked about earlier, and it's also emphasised the fact you will need to go for weak spots such as the cockpit on the bombers rather than try and sit behind them, and that is something we should have done ideally against the Wellington earlier. The P-36A Hawk dies to our friendly BB-1 and we pick up an assist, and we now make our way back towards the south towards the furball once again. So when we go into those furballs then, what about our durability? Can we take hits so we find ourselves in the middle of a furball engagement? Well, yes you can, and no you can't. It's really weird. This plane, as discussed in the history, is rather durable. You can take multiple 20mm cannon rounds from the likes of a Messerschmitt 110C4 and live to tell the tale. But the issue is in terms of the control surface durability, whereby you take the lightest scratch to a control surface and you will find that control surface loses a good portion of its capabilities, especially with regards to the elevator and the ailerons, whereby the lightest graze to an aileron tab can mean that the plane is very difficult to roll in a given direction, clockwise or anti-clockwise. So as a result, whilst you have airframe durability, your control surfaces are not as durable. But we decide not to press our durability and instead force the Messerschmitt 110C4 to stall out as they try to get out of the furball towards us. In their stall out, we decide to open fire with all guns blazing here as they begin to build up their speed in their dive, and we pick them off for another kill, and carried some momentum through as we reverse our directionality and take out a Wildcat who was just about to cut across the front of us into a head-on. And having picked up our 6th kill here, we break away once more. So we can see here how with the engagements being primarily in furballs, we do not have the ability to go into a 1 versus 1, something we were able to do in the first game with the likes of the A36 Apache. So we have to play this conservative boom and zoom playstyle, and whilst this is typical for a player like myself, I embody this playstyle I feel. It is something which is forced upon me as a pilot with the C202 in my personal experience. I could go into the furball, but I would be at a major disadvantage in the long haul. And interestingly enough, this is why I actually found this quite a frustrating plane, and I'll give you a bit of personal insight here. When flying this up against planes that are battle rating of 3.7, I can outmaneuver, and you can outmaneuver the likes of Spitfire Mark IIBs, Messerschmitt 19 F4s and the like with this aircraft. But the problem is those planes are rather durable compared to your armament, whereby the 4 machine guns you have available may not cut them down accordingly unless you can pick up that pilot kill or set them on fire. And this means what may start off as a 1v1 engagement at 4,000 metres altitude will descend into a case of it being a 2 versus 1 where you are the one. And in the end you'll put a lot of rounds into your foes, but you'll become frustrated at the fact that nobody died and you were ripped apart because of the numbers that the enemies had available to them. So this is something to be aware of, and as to why we are playing so distant from the main battle and just zipping in and out of the fight. And again we zip in here going for a lag free. We also note the P40 and the Heinkel 112, we keep our options open. We're not focusing on one fire in particular. The Heinkel's on fire, so we do not need to go for them. The lag's breaking out to the side, so we decide to go for the P40 here, who is very low and provides us with an optimum shot directly down into their main fuselage, providing us with the maximum possible span of the plane in order to hit, and we set them on fire. And as they burn to death, we pick up our 7th and final kill of this game. We now break out, making sure that nobody is pursuing us, and just take our time making our way around the mountain, keeping ourselves hidden as the game comes to its end. And it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 7 kills and single assist, we were able to pick up 22,406 silver lions and 1,954 research points. To defeat the MC.202 then, I can recommend one or two approaches. The first is to lure it into a low speed turn fight, whereby at speeds below 250 km an hour, the plane's elevator response will become heavy, meaning this plane will fall behind in the midst of a turn fight unless the pilot employs the ailerons and the rudder to compensate for it. But at speeds below 200 km an hour, excessive usage of the rudder, especially when flicking from left rudder to right rudder on a short-term basis, will usually cause the plane to kick into a violent spin. And planes such as the Hurricane Mark I, the KI-43 and the P-36 Hawk will all be able to take advantage of this. The alternative approach is to defeat this plane in a long distance head-on pass, as you can rip it apart when you have centerline mounted 20mm cannon, as found in the Messerschmitt 110C4 and the Yakovlev Yak-1. You will be able to outrange the M.C.202 of your 20mm cannon when you are going up against its two 12.7mm machine guns, which will only tickle you when you rip it to pieces. But by avoiding these two circumstances and once again calling upon the overall versatility in terms of role acquisition and performance in the MC202, we're able to come first by comparison to the rest of our team in this second match. So to conclude then, whilst at first the MC202 can come across as a very frustrating aircraft, as it is not a plane that can quickly pick up kills, i.e. within 1 to 2 second bursts, you will find that if you avoid getting caught in the midst of the furball or many versus one engagements, and instead pride yourself on setting up those 1 versus 1s and setting your opponents up for a fall, you'll be able to get into situations where you can sustain bursts of 3 to 5 seconds and use your machine guns to cut apart your foes if you're not trying to go for an instant kill as provided by your stealth belts in terms of knocking out pilots or igniting fuel tanks. And by getting into those 1 versus 1s and causing your opponent to stall out right in front of you and providing you with the perfect kill shot, you will find yourself enjoying this plane more, because this is the plane that is built around the pilots who enjoy the thrill of the kill. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.